Yes, we can.
Lovely. My name is Ahmed Noori. I'm a university student. In 2020, I was doing a report about tech inequality and the students. I'm a refugee myself, originally from Afghanistan. I've been living here for several years now in the UK. So I was facing this technology as a tech inequality technology myself, and I experienced it as I was living with in a shared accommodation with other people as well who are in education. So we all had the same issue for a long time, for several years. So like the local authority actually paid these agencies, but they failed to provide us with the internet and the Wi-Fi. So we were kind of really struggling to have internet in our place. So this was like a major issue for us, connecting to our friends, families, and talk to them, plus having access to our, doing our homework and stuff. So as a result, I became the ambassador for Refugee Week in 2020, working with Counterpart Arts. So during that time, then I worked for a couple of weeks with STAR organization to write a report about tech inequality and how it's affecting students. So I found out that the majority of the asylum seekers, especially those who do not have the right document, they cannot work. So the government home office provide them like £39 and 60 pence, which is like extremely inadequate for them to survive during the week just for themselves, let alone for them to buy internet, to do like study or anything else. Although the government provided local authorities with money as well to help the refugees as well as the disadvantaged students to have access to internet, Wi-Fi, and smart devices. But refugees and asylum seekers who are like over 19, they did not have this privilege to access those services. And so they were like marginalized and isolated. There was another report as well from the government that is saying like almost 39% of young people like suffering from mental health, depression, and lack of technology, especially access to internet, was a major issue for asylum seekers and refugees, specifically during this COVID, as we all experienced it, that, like disconnecting. And if you're living just by yourself, not having the internet and be connecting with the world, with the family, so it lead to different types of mental health and especially depression, and like you get isolated from the world. So this was like affecting the refugees like massively. And internet, Wi-Fi, smart devices, it's like basic necessities for most of us today, especially living in the West. But like for most of the asylum seekers and refugees, that they come from different third world countries and they do not have the right to work, and they cannot study with a limited budget of 39 or 40 quid. So it's really hard for them to survive in the society. And if they not have the right to, to study as well, without that right document, you cannot go to college and study. So if they not have the internet, so it will be really, really hard for them to assimilate and integrate into society, learning about the culture, British cultures, and how they can survive and how they can get by and how they can find the right type of support. So these type of services, they cannot be found easy for them. So I was like, there was another charity, I don't know if you guys heard of Baobab. So especially during this COVID, because majority of the young people, they go over there for like mental health support or for any different type of support. They provided the young people with monthly allowance, so they can buy themselves internet, and they can be connected with their therapist, so they can talk, so they do not feel isolated during this time. So it was really, really hard for them. I live in New Hamboro, so New Hamboro actually helped as well the local authority to provide some of the students with laptops, so they can be connected and study during the via Zoom and do their homeworks online as well. But despite that, most of the time, the houses they live, they do not have Wi-Fi, so it's a major issue for them. Or some of them, they cannot work, and finding the right Wi-Fi or study from home was like extremely hard for them, because first of all, they suffer from the language barrier, so they cannot understand most of the words they, so it was a terrible experience for them. I mean, there's a lot to be done in this sector, and we all have responsibility to raise awareness about inequality, and especially for refugees and asylum seekers and disadvantaged students, because they are the ones that are suffering the most, and these are the things that most of us take for granted. That we do not feel it, like like having the Wi-Fi at home, like it just become like a basic things for us. But some of the people actually living in different societies, and especially in some of the local authorities, they suffer massively from it. While I was working, as an ambassador for that in 2020, one of my colleagues was actually it's just like undocumented, and was just like receiving 39 from section 39 of Home Office, 39 quid and 6 pence. And it was just like, I was seeing like he was suffering, like he was like struggling to get the internet for himself, or to survive just like by 39 quid for the whole week. As we know, like, that everything is going up and up. Inflation is affecting most of us. So, and these young people and refugees and asylum seekers who do not have the right to work, and so they are the one that suffer the most. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. I pass to Jackson. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ahmed. I am Jackson Harms. I'm one of the communications officers at Migrant Help, and I think I'll be reiterating quite a few things that Ahmed has already mentioned, but I do believe that this is an issue that has become a bit more topical, especially in the last 2 years, even though it's something that I hope a lot of us have been thinking about, especially say within the last decade or so. So issues of connectivity, digital inequality, and how we might make some progress in really bridging what we're calling the digital divide. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So just want to quickly go over what we're going to use as a working definition for the digital divide. So that's the gap between those who regularly use some kind of digital services or technology in their day-to-day lives, and those who have difficulties accessing those services, especially on a kind of regular basis. I'd like to use something that's a little bit more expansive though in this case. So we're not just talking about this kind of material access to say laptops, internet ready phones, things of that nature, but really data is a massive thing that Ahmed's already mentioned. Also digital literacy. So those that we might consider digital natives versus those who might be newer to it, and also the additional challenges in accessing digital services in a second language. So that comes to the third point, which are language barriers. So they're not specific to digital issues, but in our work, we found that it does become yet another challenge that we need to discuss when we're talking about things like online events, accessing websites and things like that. So I'd like for us to bear that in mind. I think, especially when we think of lockdowns, the pandemic, the last 2 years, a lot of us have been online a lot more, but that might have been in the form of like online pub quizzes, or we're moving to work Teams calls. But I really want us to think about the kind of lifeline that the internet has become, especially in the last 2 years. So I don't purport to be an expert on this, but I do just want to share with you some of our experiences as an organization and how we've tried to tackle some of that and some of the kind of trial and error that we've had over the last couple of years. So just to put everything into context, here's just a bit of a snapshot, some of which Ahmed's already mentioned. So especially when we're talking about those that are seeking asylum in the UK and are waiting for a decision to be made on their claim and are receiving Section 95 support, they receive £39.63 per week. That's for those who aren't in accommodation where you might receive food. In that case, they receive £8 per week. So when we're talking about data and even some of the cheapest data plans, the kind of decision that needs to be made between affording public transit, food that might not be provided, that becomes really a secondary thing, even though it shouldn't be, because again, this has really become like a lifeline for a lot of our day-to-day activities. Looking at the broader population, over 5 million adults in the UK do not have access to the internet. Again, this is an issue that's been exacerbated by lockdown and everything really moving to online spaces. Again, as Ahmed mentioned, in this all-party parliamentary group report on social connection during this crisis, young adults, nearly 40% of young adults report feeling some kind of loneliness. And some of that has to do with lack of access to the internet as well. And then when we're looking at those of us who maybe don't put a whole lot of thought into the move online, on average day to day, we're using a lot more data, which again, I think goes to show just how much more important it's become. So bear these things in mind as we go a little bit further into this, and that again, this kind of shift has meant that specifically asylum seeking populations have become more isolated through the pandemic. So these are, again, just some of the experiences that we've had and how we've tried to address these issues, particularly with our clients. So there's a really wonderful organization called socialbox.biz, and I do encourage you guys all to check them out after this. So they're an organization that facilitates donations, typically from corporate partners. If they're getting rid of old tech kit, they'll take those donations, refurbish them, bring them back up to kind of factory settings, and they tend to load them with open source software so that subscriptions don't need to be maintained. So trying to make this as easy as possible for those that do end up receiving them. So we've received a couple of donations from them, the most recent of which was in December, at the end of last year. So New Look, the fashion brand, was getting rid of a kind of old fleet of laptops, and that was donated to Social Box. And again, they refurbished them and chose a few organizations to donate to, and we were one of them. So in total, that was 1,000 laptops. We received a few hundred of them. And the idea is to get marginalized and vulnerable populations kind of back on their feet so that they can access things like education. And then particularly say during the move on period, this 28-day move on period following especially a positive decision, determining what life looks like after that. So finding education, permanent accommodation, and things like that. Here again, in this case, we received a smaller donation at the beginning of last year to one of our offices in Scotland. And these are just some of the testimonials from our colleagues that are in regular contact with the clients who received them. So one of our clients is about to start her National for Care course, as well as English college classes, but she needed a laptop in order to undertake and get started, thanks to socialbox.biz, who sent her the laptop. Similarly, second testimonial, our client shared with us that he's eager to learn English so he can attend college, self-study. So these are kind of the testimonials that we've seen from those who receive laptops, is that they can pursue education. English as a second language courses are incredibly important, and many of those have moved online. Finding, again, accommodation, employment, things like that. So this has been great. Of course, the only issue is we'd love to see this upscaled. So it's, of course, difficult to determine who might receive them. I guess the hope moving forward is that that's something that we can talk about on a much larger scale. And yet another testimonial, this time from one of our clients themselves. So again, talking about accessing English as a second language course, impact on mental health. So being isolated and especially if you've, say, been tested positive with COVID, just having something to do. A lot of the time, access to the internet helps quite a bit with feelings of boredom, isolation, connectivity. So again, moving on from the kind of material concern and onto digital literacy. So it's one thing to have a laptop and quite another to feel kind of confident and comfortable with navigating, especially these day-to-day tasks that a lot of us have become used to, like online banking, having an email account. So this is quite an interesting case study, I think. Our trading arm, ClearVoice, offers interpretation services. And they were asked at the end of 2020 to take part in a project that was supporting the bereaved family members of victims from the Grenfell Tower fire. And I think it's particularly important, again, because when we're looking at marginalized and vulnerable groups, digital literacy, there's an overrepresentation. So in this case, 40% of social housing tenants are offline or lack basic online skills. And so there was a need to upskill, particularly to keep up with the inquiry into the fire. Sorry about that. So that was on behalf of the Kensington and Chelsea London Borough Council. Digital literacy classes include, again, setting up email accounts, how to install a SIM card into your phones, again, accessing online banking, online shopping, and ClearVoice provided interpretation, which again, we'll move on to that third concern I was talking about, which is language barriers. So we found really early on in the pandemic that the kind of tech solutions just really weren't available to provide room for interpretation, that at least in the way that we needed. So now, if we are looking for some tech solutions, thankfully, it's improved over the last couple of years. So you'll see with this event in particular, live transcription options and closed captioning, that's something that you can look into. For our purposes, one of the tricky things that we really needed to find a solution for was how to have a multilingual event. So it's improving. So now Zoom offers basically interpretation channels. So you can have, I think, up to 8 different languages. It's a live interpreter. So that is something that's a bit trickier, and hopefully some instant translation is going to be available in the future. But if that's something you guys are interested in, I will leave my my email address at the end of this presentation, and I can kind of talk about some of the solutions that we found for that. Also, other considerations, just generally talking about accessibility. I know it's slightly outside of this, but I do think it's related. Offer options to dial in. So if someone is concerned, say, about data issues, but they might have some minutes on their phone, allow them to call into the meeting if they can. If you have a website, do consider using some kind of an accessibility toolbar. So we've used, again, great company called ReciteMe. They offer kind of the typical accessibility tools, so contrast, or for those that have issues with, say, color blindness, they offer that. But there's also instant translation, I think in a couple of dozen languages at this point. So that's something to consider. Also, when we're talking about online events, I think it's helpful to explain the format at the top, just so everyone knows what to expect, to schedule around. Please consider including some breaks. I think that really long events can be a bit taxing for all of us, especially a couple of years in. So consider shorter formats and including breaks. And then I think quite simply, just ask ahead of time. So, ahead of your event, as you keep all of the attendees kind of abreast of developments, ask about any kind of accommodations that need to be made. I mean, these are quite perhaps obvious and simple things, but I find really quite helpful. Great. So I'd like us to move to the kind of discussion and collaboration portion of this. So I'll ask that you hop into your breakout rooms now, and I want you to think, what are some of the challenges that A, have either come up in your own work that you've seen, or B, that you might think exist? And then hopefully we can all come back and discuss some of those. Great. So I would be very interested to hear some of the challenges you guys have all come across, heard about. I can get us started, kicked off. So as I mentioned, I think one of the big ones is data. And there have been some interesting initiatives, but I do think that that tends to be one of the overlooked ones, is access to data. Can I hear a couple more that you guys may have come up with? And you can also pop it into the chat if you don't feel like using the mic. That's completely fine.
I can come and say, well, we were talking about apart from the problems of access to devices and laptops, and also having the IT skills, so trying to access the IT skills education for all these people. We talked a lot about access to the connectivity, to the internet data, as you said, and the fact that it's becoming more difficult to access and afford that, and it's excluding people that are already excluded. So we went into a general discussion of the fact that internet access, internet data should be part of, access to water, access to your health, the right to have a health check, and all these kind of rights that are core issues. So.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. Do you have any others that we might have come up with? And again, just I'll include another one that I hadn't mentioned before while you guys think or chat. But this is an interesting one that I don't quite have the answer to. But in addition to, say, getting data or phones or laptops, especially to those who are in asylum accommodation, is trust. So there have been some kind of short-term one-off programs where we might manage to secure phones or laptop, but kind of dispelling this fear that there may be privacy issues because they're given to them from organizations that they don't have personal connections with. There's sometimes a trust issue, and so that goes a little bit beyond the tech and the digital issue, but is still somehow wrapped up in it. So yeah, let's see. Catherine, your hand is up.
Yeah, one of the other things that I was saying in my group, and it'd be really interesting if other people have this, is actually like motivation to learn from the people that you work with. So it's trying to like explain the value of having digital skills and digital literacy. Like, not all of the people that I work with are clamoring to kind of get onto a computer, but the way in which the world has been for the past 2 years and seems to be going, it feels important to try and get people online. And so if anybody has any kind of similar experiences, I'd be really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, definitely. Claire, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, hi. We talked a bit about all the various different platforms that are used in different websites, and how it can be quite overwhelming when you have to log in and have usernames and different passwords for all the various different places that you're trying to access. So it could be that you need a login for your bank, but you have to cross-reference when you log in, you have to cross-reference with a different device, or that is you're logging in and you have to then put in a confirmation code, and it's keeping track of all those different login details and data and how you keep that safe. But also, if you're trying to help somebody to set those up, about security and being able to help somebody to do that while still maintaining their security and safety online. So that was quite overwhelming at times, I think, is the feeling, and that actually to the point that you might give up and stop trying to apply for something or stop trying to do something because it becomes so overwhelming.
Yeah, it ends up feeling like the barriers become higher and higher then, especially with these like two-step verification and things like that. Simon, I see your hand is up as well.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jackson, thanks. Yeah, so basically, amongst other things, we thought that in every city, obviously, I'm sure somewhere there must be a list of asylum seekers. It would be possible to put together a list of asylum seekers. And this could be through, say, the local council, Department of Health and Social Security, groups such as Refugee Action, City of Sanctuary, and put together a list. And then if we wanted to get refugees involved in Refugee Week in some capacity, then contact them as soon as possible to establish who they are and arrange a meeting so that everyone comes in person. Because at the end of the day, nothing beats the personal touch, and then inform them about it and then touch base. And then if we know them personally, it would be easier to contact them, get them involved in some way.
Yeah, I mean, community support, I think, is definitely the kind of preferred method of support, but again, due to the pandemic and the lockdowns, finding alternatives to that has been a bit tricky. That's been a challenge.
Yeah.
But certainly some kind of community and in-person support offers a bit of a personal touch, and again, kind of tackle some of the isolation issues. But I do see what you're saying.
Also, I mean, people say who are themselves working with refugees could basically register somebody online for refugees. You don't have access, I'll do it for you, no problem. But in some cities, there are free Wi-Fi available, but people just don't know about them. So we could use the community, like the refugee groups, to inform them that, blah, 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 this address between these hours, there's free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, true. Thank you. And Moses, I see your hand is up as well.
Sure. Yeah, in our group, we found the framework which you spoke about of networks and language and literacy quite useful. And it seems like it's quite unlikely that a refugee will be able to kind of like be in the right place on those three elements. I work for an organization called ScreenShare, who is specifically designed to try and address this problem. And we found in the past year and a bit that the central challenge is that digital inclusion is a prerequisite for accessing the solutions to the digital divide. So, we've got these solutions, but we can't contact people because they're not online. So I think organizations need to think really carefully about the way in which they're advertising their services and how much they're spending on outreach to people who don't have access to the right information.
Yeah, definitely.
If I might just say that our primary belief is that the problem from a sector-wide perspective is that there's a lack of information amongst the sector about the routes towards digital inclusion. Yeah. Some councils are very, very up for helping, others aren't. Some organizations think they can help, others can't. So there needs to be, it feels like, some sort of toolkit or some sort of resource which people in the sector can use to understand the routes.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's something, I do see we have a couple of comments, I believe, in the chat. Yeah, okay. That actually goes to, I think, this next very quick breakout room, because I think we're running a bit behind, but I want us to think of solutions. And as I mentioned during the presentation, that there have been a lot of these kind of like one-off small batch kind of donations, and they're great. And especially when we're talking about impacting people, right? And helping with their very real material needs, that's a great thing. It's fantastic. But trying to look at this on a much larger scale, it's a big question, difficult to address, and something we've been thinking about quite a bit. But yeah, what would that look like? Solutions, especially for thinking macro, structural. What are some of the things that you think, and as Moses said, these kind of like core issues, how might we address them that doesn't just involve, say, donating laptops on these kind of ad hoc basis? So if we can maybe, let's see, break out for like 7-8 minutes and think of some of those solutions and then quickly come back, that would be great.
But my view essentially is that there needs to be a kind of resource allocation model in the sector whereby everyone in the sector is aware of the different routes towards digital inclusion. I think there's a lack of knowledge about the way in which the government can help and whether their local council can help. Sometimes colleges themselves don't actually know that they have the right to apply to get one of their students a device. One really interesting thing that Shazia spoke about in our group was about partnering with big organizations like Vodafone. I feel like in terms of scalability, that Vodafone could do a lot more than our little social enterprise could do. So definitely that. One other point that I would want to make is that I think there's more scope to do advocacy in this area, particularly towards the publicly, but also to the government. Like the government know that digital exclusion affects refugees disproportionately and is more harmful when it does. And yet there isn't a specific scheme which addresses digital exclusion for refugees. So I think, yeah, just to be have a bit more self-belief, to be like, this is actually an issue which we can win on and which is fundamentally important. Like the right to water, which really chimed with me from the previous moment. So yeah, that's what we've come up with.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, I mean, I'm, I guess, hard pressed to call it a silver lining, but I do think that there's been a bit of progress and awareness, especially in like recent years. I mean, I think again, like the issue of lockdown and people being in isolation has brought this up, I think, more generally. But I do think you're right that as far as information, education about the kind of disproportionate impact that not only like asylum seekers, refugees, but just marginalized populations, generally speaking. I do think that that's something, thankfully, that's coming to the fore. Any other thoughts? What else was discussed in those breakout rooms? And we're kind of coming close to the end of time, so maybe just the last couple of comments if you have them. Yeah, Patricia, internet connectivity is a social justice issue. Data should be treated like any other utility. Vulnerable people shouldn't be cut off. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this isn't a luxury, is it, at this point? And I think oftentimes it's thought of that way.
We were, Jackson, we were talking in our group, is it possible to have a free Wi-Fi, you know, everywhere, so people in all the public spaces, places and everywhere, so people can have it. I think it's in Istanbul or somewhere, like you can go to the public park, so there's Wi-Fi, you can access it anytime you want to. So we were talking about it, like how possible is it, like could it be an option in the future or not? And whether is it just going to be as effective, or it's just going to be like similar to NHS, you know? Yeah. Like the speed is not going to be good. So this is another question.
Yeah.
Because not everyone, like even like a basic subscription for Wi-Fi, they can easily cost you 20 quid and plus. And if you're not working, for most of these young people and refugees, so they cannot afford it. Yeah. Especially from your phone to connect your laptop with it, it's extremely hard, and the speed is yeah, very frustrating. So yeah,
definitely. And yeah, I think there have been some initiatives around the world, some cities that have trialed having free internet, like hubs. But yeah, that's the kind of scalability I think that we're talking about, which is great. I don't want to keep you. It's now 12:45 or 12:46, so we're past time. Yeah, informational sheet. Yeah, practical info. Yeah, these are all great. So yeah, so with that, I think I'll leave it probably to Annie to kind of wrap up with housekeeping stuff. But I do want to thank you for the discussion. I will leave this last slide here, which has my email address and Ahmed's address. So for any of you who are working with organizations that focus on this, are looking to partner, find solutions, yeah, shoot me an email, that'll be fine.
Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, that's great. And I've just popped in the chat that we'll be sharing resources afterwards. I've also just put, yeah, thanks for sharing your details, Jackson, and that will be included in the slides that we'll share. And then I've just put the link to Eventbrite for anyone who wishes to join us for the second day of our Refugee Week Conference this year, with 4 more workshops on Friday morning. I'd love to see some of you there. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great rest of your day and week.